Hi, Misha here, and moving right along with Cat Wings, a look at the aircraft of Grumman for the U.S. Navy. I hope you guys are having fun watching this one. It's been kind of fun to make. Now we're on to an interesting plane, the F11F Tiger. And for this episode, I actually have two models for you. Both are from Vulcan. They're both the only ones who've done a 172 die-cast F11. The one here is a typical Navy fighter with armament. But then we also have this version here from the Blue Angels. Now normally I don't get flight demonstration team planes, but for the F11F, it has kind of a special place with the Blue Angels, which we'll get to in this video. But first, as always, this video is brought to you by Peanut, the tripod, and my buddy cat that's usually very nearby and just really loves to cuddle. But don't get in her way, or she will whop you with her one paw, and she's not afraid to do it. How are you, girl? Alrighty, on to the plane. The F11F Tiger. So in the last video I talked about all the different names for the F9F. Bet you thought we were done with it, but oh no. In 1952, the U.S. Navy announced a competition for a new supersonic day fighter. And this would be a true fighter, unlike the F9F, which was a fighter bomber. And already Grumman had started working on modernizing and improving the F9F Cougar, which was the swept wing upgrade of the F9F Panther. And to this end, originally the project, known as G98, was designated as XF9F-8 by the Navy, and then later XF9F-9 and XF9F-8 was used for a different plane. Confused yet? Don't worry about it. It's crazy. They just seem to like that F9 thing. Really though, by the next year, they had made so many changes to the F9F Cougar that it was an all-new plane. This new fighter prototype would fly in 1954. I believe it was in July, but yeah, mid-year. And the Navy would issue a contract seeing its performance, and they would start to put these into service in 1956. Thankfully, the following year, April 1955, they would come to their senses and change the designation to F11F-1, and then the Tiger name would get added. So they finally got away from the F9. Now it's worth pointing out, this plane did not go unchallenged. In fact, Vought's submission to the supersonic plane, which would become the F8, would technically win. It would be considered, but it was not as far along as Grumman's design. The F8 would not fly until 1955. It would not be ready for service until 1957. It wouldn't be cleared for carrier operations for a bit longer, whereas the F11F Tiger was in service by 1956. And so originally the military ordered 415, or I should say the Navy, of these, kind of again as a backup plan in case the VOT didn't work out. And this would very quickly replace the F9F and would actually be the Navy's second supersonic fighter jet, the first being the Douglas F4D Skyray. The second prototype would break the sound barrier in testing in 1954-55, and so early on this was pretty promising. We have a much longer fuselage than the F9F. We're at over 46 feet, almost 47. The wingspan is narrower though, at only 31 feet and some change. This was capable of Mach 1.1 in level flight, and it could get up to 49,000 feet, give or take. It was still equipped with 4 20mm cannon and had 4 underwing pylons. These could hold rockets or bombs, but also it could work with the, at the time, new AIM-9 Sidewinder missile, and also carry drop tanks for added fuel, as we have on this model here. So it's definitely a much more modern design. However, its career is pretty short-lived, because once the VOT F8 got to strut its stuff, it was just clearly superior. It could get up to Mach 1.8, so significantly faster. It also had longer range, and it had a much higher ceiling of about 58,000 feet. It had 4 hard points under the wings and could also work with the Sidewinder. And it too was equipped with 4 20mm cannon. Even they had the same ammo capacity of 125 rounds per cannon. This actually earned the VOT F8 the nickname Last of the Gunfighters, and it would be cleared for carrier operations in '61 and be used in Vietnam in 1965, and not retired from fighter service till 1976, so after the Vietnam War. And really, even the reconnaissance F8s would be used through the 80s. And VOT, later LTV, would make over 1,200. So the F8 ended up being a very good design. In fact, it was the longest serving Navy fighter at the time, because previous versions had come in and out of service so rapidly in the past. What about the F11F Tiger, or after 1962 as it was known simply as the F11 Tiger? Well, once it was clear that the F8 pretty much was better and there was really no advantage to Grumman's design, future orders were canceled in 1958, and the last of 200 planes were delivered in 1959 early. So the remaining half or so never went into production. So there's really only one version. The only minor difference, early ones would have a shorter nose cone, later production ones would have a longer cone. But since so few were made over a relatively short production run, there wasn't time for much in the way of upgrades or changes. These would be taken out of carrier service in 1961 once the F8 was ready to go. The Navy would still continue to operate the 200 it had, actually 199, off the land, land-based, mostly using them as trainers or auxiliary craft. They would keep this up until 1967, but by that point the F-11 it was out of service and aging and quite slow. So it unfortunately had a pretty lackluster Navy career. But that's not to say it was a horrible plane. Again, time just caught up with it, and it was quickly dated. Keep in mind that even though it's pretty much a new design, it still can trace its roots back all the way to the G75 project from the 40s, and Grumman just kept kind of building on what had come before, and it got to be clear that it was just time to kind of cut all ties with the old. So it never really saw service in Vietnam either. But it did have one more place in history, and that's actually where most people know the F-11 from. In 1957, so just right after it would go into service, the Tiger was selected to replace the F11F by the Blue Angels Naval Flight Team. And while its military service was relatively brief, it actually suited the Blue Angels very well. It was fast enough to give a good display, but not so fast that, spectators couldn't observe it. It had a very sleek, modern look. It was big enough they could see it from the ground, but still small and agile and maneuverable. And of course stripped with guns and armament that could only help. And since the Navy really didn't need the planes and parts after 1961, the Blue Angels kept flying it for the decade. In fact, it wasn't until 1968 they selected the new F4 Phantom, and 69 was the final season they flew the F11. So most people recognize this because it was one of the longest times that the Blue Angels had a plane. I mean, it was a dozen years they flew this. So, and it suited them very well. In some ways, it actually was better than the F4 because the F4 consumed more fuel and was kind of a bulkier design, less sleek and attractive looking in some ways. And the F4 would be used for less time, and then they would switch to other planes in the 70s. And that's why I have a model here. Both of these are Falcon 172 diecast. This was the first one I picked up. This came from Pete's Collectibles. He found a few of these Blue Angels kind of hiding in the back. Again, these planes have been out of production for a number of years, but he found some, and the price was very reasonable, $40 some odd. No armament because it's a flight plane, but it did come with gear up or down and a removable canopy. And at first I was just happy to have an F11F, and since this was more iconic as a Blue Angels plane than a Navy carrier plane, it almost seemed fitting, and I'm still glad I have it. But then, a short time later, a month or two later, I realized that Aikens actually did have some of these Navy style ones left in stock. And again, the price was reasonable. So a little more, I think it was like $60. So a bit of a premium for a Falcon, but I think it looks really neat with the Sidewinder missiles and drop tanks on it. And I always like the lines of this plane. I know it wasn't terribly successful, but it's a very modern looking plane, still quite small. You get into later planes like the F4 and F14, they're modern and big. This has that modern look, but it still has kind of the small size, relatively speaking, of like the F86 and all that. So I just like it. As a kid, I had a small die-cast metal Blue Angels F11 myself. I think it was Matchbox or maybe some other brand, but a couple inches, little plane. I just remember that as a kid. from the 70s. I think that's when the plane was made, maybe 80s. So it kind of stood out in my mind, and I always thought it'd be neat to have a more model style version with more detail. And Falcon's about the only ones who've ever done this in 172. I'm not even sure Hobbymaster does a 148. It would be quite huge if they did. Otherwise, you're pretty much like with postage stamp and such. So this is pretty much your only option, and unfortunately these are out of production and getting harder to find as the years go on. But again, this one was found at Pete's. As of me recording this video, he still has a couple left of the Blue Angels. And if you'd like to check him out and you'd like to support my channel here and help him out as a small business, you can use the product code Misha, M-I-S-H-A, to save 15% on your order and get free or at least very reduced price shipping. So yeah, if you like, check that out. Appreciate it. Otherwise, that's about it for this episode of Cat Wings. If you could, like, share, and subscribe, and please do feel free to comment below. Enjoy interacting with comments, it's always fun. Otherwise, this is Misha, and I will catch you very soon next time.